Welcome to MentorTime today. We have a very interesting topic, and there's where my mouse goes. So today we're going to be discussing how to quit your job after less than a year. Now, before I show you the agenda, we've already done this topic over a year ago, but there's a reason I want to go over it today. We're going to talk first about what if we quit at 6 months? What if we quit at 3 months? This is surfacing again in what I'm reading. And then how are you going to do it? And of course, we always end with what should you do? But first, I want to remind you, 6 topics have relevance for today. They either talk about how to quit your job after less than a year, or things that give you sample scripts, the 2 on graceful goodbyes and how to leave anything gracefully. And even the discussion, the year-end, that discussion that I did, I believe, at the end of last year about career breaks is relevant for today's discussion. What do you think? When would you feel comfortable quitting a job? If you don't mind, would you open up your Slido poll, either point your camera app on your phone at it or go put it in your browser, slido.com, and then just fill in for me what you think. I think this will be my choice. Okay.
Do I put the whole number in, Sue? 277?
277874 with no space. I think they do the
Okay.
spacing for readability. Welcome, Hepzibah. We've just started. If you have a chance to get on slido.com and put in the number 2778740, you could answer this poll if you're interested. Thank you. Who is this? Welcome, Strength in Numbers. I don't recognize that name, although it's sounding familiar. If you can just stick your name in the chat so I can welcome you. And if you have a chance, fill in the Slido poll. Would you quit your job after 3 months, after 6 months, after 1 year? I'll give it just a little bit more time. Okay. So we can see there's possibly a reason to do it after 3 months. I think most of us land on 6 months or a year. I thought it would be helpful to put up what I've been seeing as reasons people are leaving. None of these are new to any of us. Oh, Abby, great. Thank you for reminding me. Welcome. The ones on the left were just a short list, and the ones on the right was a long list. And you know me, if I have a long list, I want to recategorize it because it was jumping all over the map. So these are mostly company side reasons, meaning things that you're unhappy with, mostly on the company side, that the company could do better, should have done better, isn't going to change, whatever. And that includes things like finding chances for advancement, because I believe those things are opportunities the company and your bosses should be creating for you, not just you need to go look and see if there's a place for you in the company. These are more the personal, professional side. Not all of them are. But when you want to do something differently or a different kind of job, when you want to have more career opportunities, maybe you're getting a lot at your company, but they're not the right ones. Maybe they don't give you tuition remission for college, for example, and you want to pursue graduate studies. And then a lot have to do with, on the left side, it says if you have to move, but all sorts of reasons personally. including commute, and sometimes it's just, I don't want the long hours the company's demanding, which is your personal preference. I wanted to start today talking about leaving after 3 months because I was surprised to see this start to surface again as I've been watching this as I do with all the work from home, return to office information that I follow. This is a fairly recent quote from this woman, Genevieve Northrup, that there are a lot of people changing jobs to get higher pay. And they are doing this no matter when the right opportunity comes along, even if it's only a few weeks or a month. Now, this article by Indeed had an interesting perspective. They said, this is what people feel about leaving, even if they're leaving by choice. I think that they probably do think about that. Who's going to take over my work? Am I going to miss out on something that if I just waited a few months more would change? The reason I put the one in yellow is perhaps that's the one that might be more of a concern that I would think would be valid, that someone might think that they are not disloyal, but job hopping. And one of the 6 webinars we've already covered was on, is job hopping still a negative? And in fact, there are still people, as I was researching it this weekend, there's still people writing about, yes, it's a negative, but in actual fact, most people are changing jobs in a year and less. Those of us who work in global health, if you're not working globally right now, in global health, we've always had shorter term jobs because the kind of work comes in 3 to 5 year contracts, sometimes even 1-year contracts. So it was more acceptable to be moving around the world and taking different jobs. But in the US and maybe in Europe, where I don't know as well, the aspect of disloyalty might better be phrased as, might perceive that you would do the same thing to them. They'd hire you and you'd leave in 3 months or 6 months. How are you going to do this? Here's what Indeed suggested. 6 things, and I call it the plan to leave. Now, obtain another job offer. If you can do, that's great. All of these things are important, but by the time you're providing the notice, you may not be in a position where you want to be negotiating, or can, if you've already told another job you're going to come to that new job. And then they had these 3 things for what I'm calling communicated. Here's what I'm going to remind you, and I'm going to remind you again. Oops, sorry, I went the wrong way. Remind you again of all the times we've covered aspects of this, especially on leaving things gracefully. For me, these are the first 2 things you do when you're planning. When you are planning to leave a job, even as you begin to job hunt, you need to think about the 2 things under the first aspect. You need to know, what would the work turnover plan look like? And what is the comms plan about that? What do you want that to be about how you're leaving is announced? Because frankly, the very first thing you should do when you're ready to announce it is put a meeting on your boss's calendar and get in there as soon as you can. And then the second thing you should do is make sure that your resignation has gone in writing. I think by email is acceptable now. It's got to go to HR. Not everybody does this, but remember that HR represents the company and is the person, the group that's able to sign a contract with you or give you an offer letter. It's nice to write to your boss and say, thank you for all the opportunities, but you've got to tell HR at the same time. Your goal is to get on your supervisor's calendar, get in there, discuss the news as, I just want you to know, and give them the information first and then tell them how much you've appreciated working with them. In fact, someone said gush all over them. Whatever way you want to do it. The previous screen said don't be rude. I can't imagine anybody being rude, and maybe if they're really angry, saying, I'm walking out. But generally, the best way to do it is come in here with these two plans. Don't expect your boss to take them and follow them. But what you're doing is saying, I have thought about you, just like we talked about a year ago in managing up. I have thought about what would be needed to cover my work till you can fill it again. And you can suggest people to do certain things or whatever aspects you can finish up in the 2 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever is the mandatory notice. And I believe the previous slide from Indeed said something about checking. You need to check the company's HR document, whatever thing they have in writing that says, here's when you resign, here's what you need to do. In many companies, it's 2 weeks notice, even if you're very senior, which is not always helpful if someone senior walks out the door. But you also want to be thought of as making a person who's made a plan to make sure that people know where your files are, what the client's phone number, mobile phone number is, whatever ways you've made the work go. Equally important is what and how do you want communicated about your leaving? When I left a job, I said, look, Jim, after telling you and HR, I need to let a key person in the US government and part of NIH that I was working with, the project director, I'm going to call her first thing tomorrow morning and tell her what our plans are for transitioning my work, because I was the senior evaluator on the project. But also I said, and then I want time to tell my staff, the staff that I supervise, and I want to tell the senior management group that I'm in. Now, you have to negotiate that with your boss, but at least go in there saying, these are what I'd like to do. You can even prepare a draft announcement. Sue's moving on. In my case, I was retiring, but Sue's moving on and will be leaving in 2 weeks. However your boss wants to do it, though, you can give them all the tools and information, and it's their decision, and they're taking it forward. All right. Indeed also then talks about, before you think about quitting and announcing it, here are some of the reasons you may want to quit your job that helps you. The last one, let me back up. All of these are important, and they are things you'll see in the what can you do about it. There are things that in some cases you could mention as a valid reason for leaving your job. But I think you have to be really careful about saying to people, I've got to go where it's not so stressful. Because when that gets around, that makes it look like you just want to sit at your desk and do easy work. And that's not what you intend, I know. And this extract I took was not intended for me to take it that direction, but it just reminded me that's something that you don't want to know, because the minute someone says, I'm leaving because of stress, then they can start saying, oh, she has mental health issues, or she doesn't ever respond anyway. That people can make up all sorts of stories. Just want you to be careful about that. Cons, that question about loyalty, we talked about that earlier. I don't think it's so much as loyalty as would you leave another company right away? And that's different from loyalty. What I highlighted in yellow is, and this is very important, and the Indeed information I showed you in one of the first screens said this about, you need to make a financial plan. And that includes knowing what kind of health coverage, how much is COBRA going to cost, what does it cover, how and in what way are things going to change for you, not just a paycheck coming in the door, but all of the benefits that a company gives you. So I want you to definitely think about that. And that's something, when we talk about always be looking, is something that you should be thinking about quite often. All right. I loved this use of Scrabble tiles to say commit or quit. I hadn't really heard that before. And that's a little bit about leaving a job. But what can you do immediately? The biggest thing for you is going to be in interviews and possibly on paper when if they ask you to write a cover letter on paper, listen to me, in a document that's going to be uploaded. If they ask you to write a cover letter that explains why you're interested in the job and why you're leaving your present employer, and I haven't seen that part of a cover letter asked for, but it could be at some point. Generally, the first time you're going to have to answer this will be talking to a recruiter or in a job interview. Now, Indeed had some very interesting information that started with the kinds of things that you need to rehearse. Again, you're going to need, this is all work you're going to have to do, like preparing for an interview with the interview questions. This is preparing to discuss a job gap, a job leaving. And then another source I found actually talks about how you frame different reasons. And you can see for a couple of them, I didn't give you everything here, they have sample answers for in each case, 3 different cases of how the sample scripts for how you could talk about it. Here's what I'd like you to think about if you're leaving in 6 months or less. Not all of this is mine. This is from information we've actually discussed in the past. But especially if the job fit wasn't good, it was different than it was advertised, then you need to talk about what's happening at the company and why, not that you didn't fit in, but why it wasn't aligned with the skills and experience that you had and the job you were being hired to do. So be careful about the term, it wasn't a good fit for me, because to me, that's weaker than talking about there was no alignment between what was advertised and what I actually ended up doing. And that's what this person at CNBC, someone Minshew, says, especially if you have a short stint. Acknowledge that. Not ideal, but there were really important differences between what was advertised that I interviewed for and what I ended up doing for 3 months. Definitely while you're preparing for the interview, you've got to show your impact. Forget all this, oh, it wasn't good enough, or I really couldn't get along with people. That's all past. Leave it in the past, as we always do in an interview. Focus on your impact. What can you bring to the future? What do you contribute when you walk in the door? And back to the CNBC person, Minshew again said, if it's a short job, you could consider leaving it off, especially if it's an older job. If it's your most recent job, I think it's better to acknowledge it and show them and through the interview and your cover letter that you can talk about why something was this unusual case of you've had a good career for 5 years and now this just didn't work out because it wasn't aligned with what you were interviewing for. Here's how many MentorTime presentations I found that you should be able to get various sample scripts from. And if you want any of these, I'm in the process of getting them all captioned and put up on YouTube. The newer ones in 2023 are captioned, but before that aren't. But if you're looking for a specific one, just email me, let me know which title or titles, and I'll send you the Dropbox links to look at because they're not up on the web anywhere. And then a lot of these resources. And when I send the email out, I will put these links in for you. So I'm going to stop there and ask Ron comments on this topic.
Yeah, the main thing that I could see was it's really in that short stint one. And I think you ought to, when you're in that situation and you discover as you're going through that first 3 months that things are not working out the way you had hoped. I think you need to consider also is what steps are you taking to realign it, to find out whether you're into some kind of a short-term, there's a short-term situation in the employment, and that's why it's not quite aligning because there's some kind of special project happening or whatever. There could be any number of reasons why the alignment isn't quite what you imagined. And I think it's wise to explore whether that is the case or not. And then, having explored it and discussed it with your supervisor, that's when you finally discover, wait a minute, this isn't really aligning. This isn't quite what I've had. And so that would be something that I would add there, just in that process of figuring out, is this working or not? And that's basically all I had to add.
Great. Thank you very much, Ron. That's really helpful, those comments. Anybody have any comments or questions on this topic? As I said, we've done it before. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Thank you for this. I wish I'd had this 20 years ago when I was earlier in my career and realized it was not a good fit. So I have two questions. One, have you found when somebody quits, that does the person usually make the announcement, or have you found that the supervisor prefers to make the announcement? And then the second question is, for those of us, I know everybody on the calls are probably at different points in their career, do you find that when you're ready to leave or it's not a good fit, if some of the reasons are better earlier in your career versus using one later in your career?
Good
Or does that
questions,
not
both of
matter?
those. Yeah. In terms of the announcement about quitting, I think that should be between you and your supervisor. And I welcome others who've left jobs and want to give your experience. But my preference is that you negotiate with your boss, that you talk to direct colleagues, that possibly you talk to the client. Some bosses don't want you to talk to the client because they want to reassure the client that there'll be a direct link to the boss or the supervisor while the position's being filled. Especially, I find that very common with US government contracted funded work. But other times the boss may say, go ahead and you can disseminate the information. I think at the macro level, when I think about it, the best opportunity is for the supervisor to do it, and also to even if it's someone who's relatively new to the org, whether or not they're junior or senior, you want the company to look like they're behind the transition and are going to make it work, because the supervisor, frankly, has to think through who is going to pick up Sue's work, who can take on this client who's got Sue's skills in evaluation or whatever. So hopefully that helped on that. And on the second question, which I suddenly forgot, I wrote it down and I wrote who announces, but we'd already talked about that.
That's okay. Are some reasons better to use earlier in your career versus later?
Yeah. I think COVID has shown us that there are many valid reasons, personal, professional reasons to leave that were never acknowledged as important before. In the old days, it was like, what do you mean you're leaving to go travel for 6 months? What do you mean you're leaving to take care of family? Everybody had everybody in senior management would just think of you as not a very good worker. That's just general. So rather than earlier in your career, you could think about X and Y, I would think about what is it about the kind of work you do. Like I said, in global health, we tend to see people at even very senior levels changing jobs after 2 or 3 years. Other times we see people staying on jobs longer and longer. And Peter, I see your hand up, so welcome and tell us your thoughts.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'm using a new headset, so I want to make sure it was coming through okay.
Great. Nice to hear you.
Yeah, there was a lot of good advice there, and I missed the first half, so I only got half the advice, and a lot of it was really good. I've made mistakes in the past dealing with trying to give a good reason for why I left a position, whether I was there short term or a long term, and not knowing how to address that. So it's a really good idea to have something scripted out and practice it, especially if you have someone like Sue and Ron that can help you kind of parse out what makes sense and how people might perceive it. So having just done a lot of this process myself and moving to a new position, I talked to my supervisor about how we would announce, and she was great. And we had this whole communication plan as Sue has encouraged us to do in the past. And I had it all set with how to do it. And she was perfectly happy to allow me to tell our team and to do the announcement. And then, so I was able to do that, but then HR just posted the position for everybody to see before any announcement was made to the whole organization. So on one hand, it went smoothly, and then on the other hand, HR couldn't be bothered to let me do any kind of announcement and just did what they wanted. So I guess I would say you can make your plan, but realize that you may or may not be able to do your plan.
That's really helpful. I had never ever thought about HR getting a job posting posted that quickly that could preempt it, but it's important. And that's why you want to make sure you keep HR in the loop, but you also use HR for what you're able to use them for as the representative of the company for making sure the transition's smooth, but also getting what you need for where your benefits go, any retirement plan issues, things like that. And Hepzibah asked this question: people who spend years working on a job are automatically thought of as experienced. When one changes job roles in less than a year and several times, it's thought he or she doesn't have the mastery over what they do. So what then is the best time to change a job? It's a great question. And you're right. There is often a sense, Hepzibah, that the longer someone's at a job, the more experienced they are. But remember who you're talking to, Sue and Ron. What do we focus you and ourselves on? Making sure we describe in our control of the convo, our side of the convo, our evidence-based results, what we have experienced and are able to bring with our results. Now, yes, in short-term jobs, if you're there 3 or 6 months, and especially for people who are new out of school or in school and doing internships or fellowships, those may be more short-term, 3 to 6 months. But there are ways to talk about building up your skills. So for example, if you have 2 or 3 short-term jobs, and let me just back up, there are jobs that are short-term. You could have a job that had a 3-month or 6-month contract. So it isn't always you making the choice to leave. Sometimes you are out of a job because they originally hired you for 3 to 6 month contracts. And we've seen a lot of that in COVID. And I forgot, even a week ago, I was talking to someone who one of the jobs she found we discussed was a 3-month contract. And I said, you realize this is 3 months? And she said, yes, but it gets me in the door. I've got a job. I've got blah, blah, blah. That there was a possibility she might be hired. But at the very least, what you want to do is then not describe the previous job. You talk about over the last 3 years. Here's what I've been able to do for 2 different companies. Over the last 1 year at 2 different organizations that are very similar or very different. I worked with a big team or a small team. I produced this. I produced that. Let me stop there. Ron, do you have comments on this question Hepzibah gave us?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. And I was thinking along similar lines that you're talking about there is this idea that you have a bunch of accomplishments, and it's surprising how quickly your accomplishments add up, depending on how dynamic the position is and so on. It's really awkward when you've got one project and there are a certain number of deliverables and you're a long ways away from any of them. And so then all your work is leading up to some deliverables or something like that. And that can be a bit of a challenge. But I think that's the challenge of really getting into any position, whether you're only there on a 3-month contract or whether you're brand new in the job, is start paying attention really early on to the fact that you're adding value to the company. And then, because you don't know, you don't know, a company could fold, whatever. There's all sorts of things can happen that are outside your control. So the idea would be to gather those accomplishments, keep track of them, keep that CV updated, and starting very early in the job. And folks that I've talked to You'll ask, you say, you've been at the job for a couple of months, so have you been updating your CV? And well, I'm going to get around to that. And I'm going to say just early on, you want to do that just because you don't know. And it's a pretty iffy world out there. Great question.
Yeah, it is a great question, Hepzibah. I assume that answered what you were asking because you just put a comment. Thank you, Hepzibah. I'm glad to know we hit the key points. And I will just make a little advertisement right now in December. I forgot the date. I think it's the 12th. We're having our semi-annual 2-hour co-working space for you to come and update your CV or resume or LinkedIn profile. It's not a teaching space. You can get consultation from Ron and me if we're both able to attend, I think. And at the same time, you'll be able to spend the time getting that done before the end of the year. You'll have your year-end accomplishments summarized as well. All right, I'm going to open up the chat box in case there's any other questions on your mind before we close for today. And Ron, do you want to tell them why you have a pink wall behind you right now instead of the drapes around your window?
Yeah, for those who are used to having my beige, bland background, I'm now in Mexico in one of the locations we're going to be here. And this lovely pink wall is part of the decor. And I'll be here for a few weeks. And so you'll see it from time to time, those who come to MentorTime or some of the other activities we do, like office hours. I think I'll be here as well. I am moving around a little bit between now and January, but this is one of the places I'll be spending some time.
All right. And Ron, I'm going to ask you to close the meeting, if you will.
Oh, I noticed that on my background there, I have all this color as well. So it's not the same place, by the way, that photo that I've used on my LinkedIn account. Anyhow, so thanks very much for joining. And thanks for the questions. Sue and I weren't sure how long this session would take, but with those questions, it really added to it. So thank you for participating by giving us those questions. And we look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks' time for our next MentorTime.
Right. You'll be getting an announcement of the December timings. Oh, yes, we have it. Sorry. Next time is,
2 weeks.
I think it's the CV as your data visualization, trying to view your documents. And then the December one in early December is on the quarterly update to the changing nature of work. I think I remembered them, Ron. All right. And just a reminder to everybody, you're welcome to distribute this as long as you do it with our name on it. Thank you very much. Take care, everyone.